Hi and welcome to Dynamics Updates. And this time we are actually not recording after hours. We are not at our respective homes. We are actually in a podcasting studio, which is the first.
Yeah, absolutely. It took, 4 years, 5 years?
And we also have an audience. So that's
Yes.
also a first today. So as usual, I'm Johan Persson and I have my colleague Gustav Sundblad.
Hello.
Hi, Gustav.
Hello.
Hi.
Feels fantastic to be here. It seems very, it's a very far stretch from being at home with like laundry in the background, and but now it's a professional studio.
But we don't have a podcast poodle.
We don't have a podcast poodle, but that's true. So we'll see how this goes, actually. But hoping I can survive.
Yes. So this is one of the regular episode updates where we go through the updates in the new .40 version.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we've been discussing you on how we're going to survive now that they've lowered the release cadence to fewer releases per year. But I think we will manage with doing special episodes. Now that we have a fancy podcast studio as well, I think we will manage.
Yes, and we will also be able to do more interviews and things.
Yes, exactly.
That's even more fun. So
exactly, absolutely.
Anyway. All right, so let's get started. I hand a stick over to you, Gustav.
Oh, can I start? Thank you. Well, I just started, and as always, there's no built-in priority here. It's just looking at the release notes and trying to figure out the ones that speak to me most. Well, being the nerd that I am, one of the first ones I noticed was in accounts payable in finance. There's a feature to extend the length of vendor invoice numbers. It's not really a big thing. It's more like usually in EDTs when you have when the string is too short, you need to extend it because vendor invoices, depending on where you do business, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be the 20-character number sequence we have in Dynamics. It can be very, very long. So I would say 99% of everyone have resolved this with extension, but now you can actually enable a feature that will extend the invoice number from 20 characters to 50 in the vendor invoice and invoice journal. You need to, however, add a ticket to open a specific flight key. So it seems I haven't seen this type of feature before. Actually improving specific EDTs. It's been extension, I would say. So if you have extended your vendor invoice number, maybe have a look at this to, as you say, Johan, minimize your technical debt and move more over to standard. Makes sense?
Yeah, as you said before, we have only seen flighting keys for preview features.
Yeah.
Especially preview features that sort of changes the base behavior of the system in a way where we might not be able to go back if we decide we are not going to use it anymore. But as you said, I think it's a good idea to point out that we will eventually get into situations where Microsoft does updates that everyone already has done.
Yeah.
Which means that you will have to make a decision on whether to revert your own updates and go with Microsoft's, which I would say is the preferred way.
Absolutely.
Because it's less code that we need to maintain going forward. Or if you keep your setup and go on the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think that this is a pain point for pretty much all system implementations ever. That when you reach the operation state, you have this backlog of nice new features to have. It's always a hard sell to remove something that's working with something that's working just exactly the same. It's just that it's standard. So I think that makes, but this makes a good point to kind of always include at least a couple of % in your backlog to make improvements to move away from customizations because it's easier to maintain. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I really agree. We need to have space in our backlog to be able to work on technical debt.
Yes.
Because we will always have it and we will always need to get rid of it.
It's just a hard sell in a budget discussion normally, but it's important.
Yeah, I think going at it more long term and trying to understand why do we do this and what is the point. Because, eventually Microsoft will do things that depend on this longer number sequence field. And then we will have to handle it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So might as well do it while it's less work and no issues.
Yeah, I've had scenarios where we had to do an extension and then couple of releases later, that extension down standard functionality came to handle it. And I'll be honest, not in 100% of those cases we have moved to standard yet, but I think it makes it's important to kind of keep it in your backlog to try to do it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so my first is actually a finance feature. And once in a while you end up in a situation where you see a feature and you're thinking, wasn't this already there? It should have been, absolutely. So in this case, it has to do with managing bank accounts and activation of bank accounts and changing bank accounts. So what we got here is that we have gotten better support for workflows around how we handle bank accounts. So it's not a good idea that anyone in the system can change the bank account for anyone, because that's normally a very bad idea.
Yeah.
So having a workflow is the absolute minimum. But what I like with this one is that not only do we get the workflow, we also get the logging feature, which means that we will be able to go back and see the history of all of the changes that has been done for a specific customer and so on. And that's even more important, because that is one of the things that I actually think is lacking a bit in finance and supply chain. We have a lot of history when it comes to purely financial transactions. We have journals, we have postings, we can see everything that has been done, everyone who posted anything, everyone that did a change. But when it comes to setup and configuration, there is actually no follow-up on what has been changed, when it was changed, by whom, and what the previous version value was.
That's very true. I mean, in many cases, you use the database log, you use alerts. We also used, with good measure, the electronic signature recently to force a user to actually sign why they do this change on specific. This was on VAT accounts, I think, just to ensure that consistency. I actually, back in the day, I ran like an update. It was a service ticket to update CUS table. It was in AX 2012. And when you do that in AX, of course, in many systems, it logs the modified by. So I got a very, very angry email the day after from their supervising team, who has changed all the customers, because they were worried that I had changed the bank accounts. So that particular customer had a very good monitoring in place. So using this way of doing workflow, you can also make sure that you can trust that no one changes your sensitive information, and specifically in payment scenarios, that's even more important.
Yeah, and there are a couple of those obvious things that should always have logs enabled for it.
Yeah.
So having to resort to using database logging and having to resort to build your own functionality around this, it shouldn't be a thing. Especially when it comes to bank accounts, that should be something that wouldn't even be possible to turn off the logging for, in my opinion.
No, exactly. And I think both alerts and database logging can be a bit dangerous from a performance perspective if you don't know what you're doing. So it's good to have another mechanism in place for this.
Yeah, and the thing with database logging is that since it's not sort of a recommended way of doing things, I mean, the general advice from Microsoft is don't use database logging. and the reason is, of course, not that you shouldn't use it at all. The reason is that if they say you can use it, then people will turn it on everything, and that will have performance issues. But I mean, for bank account, it doesn't really matter if you have database logging or not.
Yeah, you just know who did it.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter from a performance perspective, but it does matter from a security and governance perspective.
Absolutely.
And that's why I think that it's relevant that Microsoft says that you shouldn't use database logging by default, but it should be that they have an alternative solution for those areas where it is absolutely required to have logging and accountability.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yes. So you're next.
This one is also on finance. So this is one thing that I've noticed throughout my career, or is in a lot of implementations you encounter a lot of processes that you look at them and you think, okay, why hasn't anyone complained? You're spending hours on these tedious tasks where you click 20 times, etc. So I think all of these minor improvements, this is a very small thing. The feature is reverse related journals. So basically when you can automatically split large journals when you post them for performance reasons. And that of course creates multiple journals. So now if you made an error, you need to reverse all of those individual journals one by one. So now this feature basically allows you to reverse them at the same time. So you're saving time. It's not a big thing, but every little feature that improves the daily working life. You and I, Johan, we often work with technical implementations. It's very rare that we actually do the day-to-day work to post journals. It's important to keep that in mind, that it's not only a technical, cool performance solution, it's also someone has to go every day and handle the journal. So every little improvement there is a nice feature, I think. So worth looking into if you have a lot of, hopefully you shouldn't have to reverse that many journals, but if you do, this will save some time.
Yeah, and I think also that having a clear understanding of what it means to be on the line, so to speak, to work
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
system every single day. Because I even think sometimes that our colleagues, the people who work more functionally with the system, they don't always appreciate the end user experience as well. They talk a lot about new features and so on, and I think this is one of the ones that is actually very, very important because of what it does to the end user experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. So my next one, I would just like to mention that the feature that we talked about a while ago, the customer and vendor netting, is actually being put into general availability now. So now you can use it. And if I don't remember wrong, the whole point was that if you have both vendor and customer invoices for an entity, then you can net them and just do the.
It simplifies the process. Well, again, I'm not a finance expert here, but I've been in a couple of tedious walkthroughs of how to handle customer balances and netting and reconciliation. So if I understand correctly, this will make it easier because you could work with the balances and not on the individual transactions when you need to, like, it's a lot of detective work. It's what you need to do, and this I hope at least will simplify that process so you can keep track of your customer balances.
Yeah, and I think this also has to do with the reconciliation functionality that's coming with automatic reconciliation. So again, the end user experience, not having to do this matching would be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So my next one, I would just like to mention as well that there is a new Workspace. It's been in the works for quite a long time, but it's called the Collection and Coordinator Workspace. It's actually not something extremely new, but the whole point of it is that you group all of the things that has to do with collections into one place. So, for instance, the payment prediction features will be there and so on. So I think that's good because I think normally if you look at how people work in the system, this is a specific task to be done. Having all of that in one place also makes it a lot easier to handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we mentioned this before, there are some AI capabilities in that Workspace as well to kind of help generate at least a draft of an email, like we see you haven't paid invoice X on date Y, etc. So it kind of helps you to initiate that process. It's not magic. It's pretty simple, but it helps, again, saving those 15 minutes, an hour perhaps, to do the analysis and to filter the forms. So I think it's worth looking into. It also has, I looked into this a little bit because I know a lot of customers you need to decide, do you do your own collection or do you hand it off to a third-party collection agency? In many cases, the customer's like payment, the payment will is higher if it comes from a known collection agency rather than if it says like, please pay our invoice from customer or from vendor at X. But you can do both. You can have like the first phases of your collection can be your own, because then you can save some costs.
Yes.
And then once you reach a specific stage, then you can hand it off to a third-party collection agency, which is also supported in the system. So it's not either or. You can do both and reduce your costs. So it's worth looking into.
Yep. Cool. You're next.
Yeah, another one is a little bit, I was not going to say favorite, but it has to do with warehouse and return items. I've worked both at warehouses and I've worked with designing logistics flows for returns in a commerce perspective mainly. And it's quite, the Swedish word is fyrkantig, it's like, it's quite tedious sometimes because you need to, on the one hand, a box shows up at the warehouse and it's tagged with something and you need to, okay, what is it? Is it a quality return? Is it broken? Do they don't want it? On the other hand, finance departments wants a clear disposition code. They want to book it to the correct account. So you have these two worlds where one is a poor warehouse worker like myself who just needs to like put it into the warehouse. So it has been a more efficient process of the inspection of returned items. One clear change here is that you had to enter a disposition code before you could start before. And the disposition code can be like put it back into the warehouse so it can be sold or scrap it. And it's hard to make that choice before you've actually done the inspection. So it makes total sense to first do the inspection and then add a disposition code. So there are some improvements here in that process. It's a quite important process. It can drive a lot of time at any warehouse to handle the returns properly. So it's worth looking into that feature. It's some improvements in how to print the return labels, some batch jobs for cleaning up data and expiration dates, etc. So improvements in the return process worth looking into.
Yes, that's really nice. So my next has to do with one of our reoccurring themes that we've had over at least this year. It has to do with data management. And the thing is that since Microsoft decided that they were going to start charging us for database storage, a lot of the features that has been coming out have had to do with how we optimize storage amount, how we get rid of data, what we can get rid of. Because historically, we have never had to get rid of anything. We just ask IT to put in a few more disks in the SAN and then we're off to the races. And in this case, it has to do with customer balance statistics, which is something that is updated constantly, but which is also kept constantly. But which means that it will end up just growing and growing and growing and growing. And there hasn't been a clean-up solution for this prior to this. So what we have coming is a solution that we can actually set an amount of time that where this table expires, so we can purge older records from it as well. So I think that's really good.
Very nice. So it wouldn't be a real episode without mentioning Copilot at least once, right?
You had a chance when we talked about collection workspace.
Yeah, exactly.
You could have used a new brand name.
I could have. I should have mentioned Copilot, of course.
Yes.
So shame on me. But well, I'll redeem myself by bringing up Copilot now in the forecasting, the supply chain management forecasting, where you now can use Copilot to help out. I think I've been working a lot with Copilot now recently. Actually, I worked in Copilot Studio. Always been struggling a little bit to find the natural use cases for finance and operations specifically. And I think it's easier now to make the pitch that Copilot is actually, it's a tool that can assist and it can improve because it can, when used correctly, again, remove those additional minutes and maybe hours that you need to spend on analysis and need to spend on, okay, what does this mean? When did I last sell something to my customer, etc. And it's exactly that. It's in the demand planner workspace where you can work with Copilot to kind of ask questions. It's all natural language. So that's what you need to kind of come over that threshold to speak to a chat agent. As soon as you do that and you work with it naturally, like ChatGPT, and a lot of people are using that already, this can help you to kind of get a better understanding of what am I looking at. I think that's the best use case I have. Like, okay, what am I looking at? Can you give me some more information? Can you help me find this? Once Copilot is used that way, it's really it's a game changer in the form of efficiency, I would say. So it's also very fun to play around with. So I implore you to do that if you have the chance.
Yeah, I think that that the traditional view of Copilot that we have, that it's something that generates output. From an F&O perspective, I think the more relevant use is actually to have it as an interface, to be able to talk to the system, ask questions to the system, to, in an easy way, try to understand. Because, I mean, for me, that is not using the system functionally. I have realized a long time ago that my big issue is finding where I need to go to figure something out. Yeah. Because I don't necessarily have all of the correct concepts in that I know what they are called. So that means that when I try to find something, I need to first understand what it's called, and then I need to go there. But if I can explain to a chatbot in this case and say, I would like to figure out the net value of the customer's orders for 2024, for instance, that would be a very simple way.
Yeah, because exactly, it takes away that, okay, go to this form, filter this way, find it, export to Excel, do some summaries. It takes away those extra minutes of additional work that you can use. Yeah. Being the nerd, I try to compare it to like Star Trek tricorder or any sci-fi scenario, like computer, give me this, computer, give me that. Yeah. And that's really, but that's what it can be when used well, I would say. And it's really cool. And it's actually a very good efficiency enhancer in any process, really.
Yes, so I don't actually have any other.
Oh, really?
No.
So then it's all me. I have 3 more, but they are all commerce. My favorite, one of my favorite topics. And I want to again mention it. We mentioned it a couple of times before. The insider programs, previously known as Yammer, now Viva Engage. They are very. It's worth your time to be there. We're trying because the product teams are there. They're asking for feedback, and I know the commerce team is doing a lot of UI enhancements. So they're asking for feedback in many cases. So it's if you haven't been there already, please go there because you can find a lot of information and actually provide feedback to the product to make it work the way you want. With that in mind, there are a couple of enhancements now for the point of sale, the store commerce. Specifically, one thing I noticed is the app, for mobile devices, for Android or iOS. You can now scan barcodes and QR codes with the rear-facing camera, so you kind of light up a lot of easy scenarios where you can have mobile devices. And I just run around any pop-up store or just a store where you need to be mobile. You don't need to maybe invest a lot of money in these fancy rugged devices. You can actually do it on a simple Android device.
Because that was actually the change here, was that before you could do it, but you needed a specific device with a specific software on it. Now you can use the standard out-of-the-box functionality in iOS and Android.
Exactly. So it lowers the threshold to use store commerce in those scenarios, I would say. Another thing just to mention is that the store commerce self-checkout, in any store you walk in now, a lot of people have self-checkout. So now you can turn on the kiosk-based, basically self-checkout. So it's also, again, in the pop-up scenario perhaps, or in your, if you have a minor need to do self-checkout, you can do it now with store commerce as well. So yeah, I just mention a final one where you have one thing. I built a couple of payment solutions for commerce before, and it's always been a little bit, from a technical perspective, tedious because you had to store the whole card token. Even though you're not using credit card, you're using something else. You needed to kind of save it, and it's, if you look at like largest tables in the solution, payments are usually there. Now there is support for the non-recurring payment tokens, where you can support payment operations without the need to store a card token. You can do it for online store, call center, and customer orders. So you can do it with a single authorization request. You don't need to store those large tokens throughout. And it's important for some scenarios, not for all, but it's worth mentioning because if you have those payment scenarios where you don't need to reserve and then capture, etc., it's worth looking into to save some time. So yeah, that was it for me.
Yes. So that means that we are done for today. We have a couple of special interviews lined up going forward. So we will be back with more episodes soon.
Definitely.
Yes. And by that, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.